Welcome to our webinar on optimizing professional services. If you enjoy this topic, please explore our YouTube channel for more videos and follow us on LinkedIn to be in the know for event announcements and speaking engagements.
I'd like to thank everybody for joining and starting us off with a couple quick questions, or a couple quick survey questions. I will try to circle back as we go through this webinar in terms of those questions and kind of highlight why we asked them. Just to start off with, oftentimes when we talk about resource chargeability or resource capacity or any number of other things, it's very easy to get confused and to circle in your organization with all kinds of conflicting drives. We will talk about some of that actually, but fundamentally, we're in the business of clearing an inventory of hours, and hours are very much like donuts, which is to say that they both are generic. Everybody charges a certain bill rate for an hour, and they're fundamentally interchangeable. And they're not generic at all. There are people that like sprinkles, and there are people that hate lemon, and so on and so forth. So at the start of every day, you've got a rack full of donuts. You've got to clear that rack. If you have too many donuts left, then that is cash that you have left on the table. If you have 0 donuts left, then it's likely that, again, you didn't sell as many as you could have. And at root, this is the same basic philosophy around hours and resource chargeability. Every day you start out with a set of resources. They have a mix of skills and talents, and every day they can bill theoretically 8 hours or more, or they can bill less. And the extent to which you are successful is how much they actually manage to get billed. So the problem, of course, when we get into a large organization is it's not a simple counter full of donuts that somebody can simply walk into the store and buy whatever they need. And every day we look at the exact same trend and we find out exactly, how many donuts we sold yesterday that had sprinkles, for example. In our organization, we've got a scattering of incentives and a scattering of politics, and we have a scattering of roles. And each one of these things kind of have to come together and try to resolve this in a way that, again, leads to fundamentally making sure that we clear all the hours out of our inventory every single day. And the truth is that when you're a small organization, when you're 30 plus people, say, it's fairly straightforward to do this with a spreadsheet. It starts to get a little bit tricky as you start to climb in numbers to where you have multiple people needing to do resource planning. The maturity of your process starts to matter more and more. Either these spreadsheets that you may have been using start to feel a little bit more inadequate. And it suddenly becomes possible to start really seeing some significant return on utilization as you advance in numbers of consultants that you need to keep billing based on, actually enabling process maturity and some tool maturity, which of course we'll talk about as well. I don't think this should be any surprise to people. What the emphasis for this slide should be, and the takeaway is that when you're considering automating some of this process or all of this process, especially when we're talking about chargeable resources, it's possible to really root the investment in what you think the return is. So again, as your organization grows larger, the difference between a 60% chargeability number, for example, and a 62% chargeability number will more than pay for process maturity in a system if you can actually measure it. OnePlan for service delivery, there is and this is a nuanced and complicating problem that we see again and again in our client base. There's both the need to optimize for resource chargeability, and there's a need to optimize for what we call contracted deliverables. So let's take OnePlan, for example. OnePlan is a software company. If you choose to work with us, you'll end up paying a subscription for OnePlan. That's all great and good. When that subscription starts is important to OnePlan. So is our consulting services and how chargeable they are. If we optimize for one versus the other, we will have an impact on the other revenue stream. This is kind of very obvious. OnePlan itself is a tool that supports both the predictable delivery of contracted deliverables, and resource utilization. So you really have two revenue streams in this world that you're trying to optimize for. And one of the revenue streams will, ultimately outweigh the other one, typically based on, what your return is. But in many of the goal is to not throw one completely under the bus, and instead to say, yeah, we can actually do better optimizing for both, or near optimizing for both. Traditional PSA tends to be something that people call quote to cash. It runs all the way through sales and through the very end of project accounting. OnePlan is not a tool that is that comprehensive. OnePlan is designed to work within or between a sales tool or CRM like Dynamics or Salesforce, and we'll talk about that over and over, and an actual ERP like SAP and Dynamics, if that's where you guys are, for invoicing. In between, however, is where OnePlan works, and we'll talk about why OnePlan is optimized for that scenario. So again, OnePlan provides integrated services delivery. We're not in the business of trying to dislodge a CRM that's working, and we're not in the business of trying to dislodge a financial system that's, your accounting system and your invoicing system. But we are in the business of making sure that what you sell gets optimized in terms of revenue as it flows through. So there are three primary types of planning available in OnePlan: scheduling, including both Agile and Waterfall, resource capacity planning, and financial. I say that organizations often mistake one system of record with one valid way of doing things, because each one of these, I hope by this point is clear, each one of these are absolutely valid ways of planning and managing your organization. Each one optimizes for something different. Scheduling optimizes for delivery, resource capacity planning optimizes for resource chargeability, and financial planning optimizes for budget responsibility. In each case, each process produces different results. The great thing about OnePlan is that we support all three as if all three are important, and instead we provide a mechanism for surfacing the disagreements and resolving them, again, in a way that will maximize ultimately the resource throughput, or the revenue throughput, revenue realized, I should say. We'll demo all these things, but improve proposal estimating. One of the advantages of OnePlan is that you can build very lightweight schedules early on in the sales process. These proposed schedules can coexist in your portfolio with other currently running engagements and provide kind of a look ahead as to what the impact would be if sales actually closed. Again, the emphasis is on the fact that these can be very lightweight and very easy to build, but still represent some aggregate data that helps you make decisions. Same thing goes for resource estimates. So we can build in a spreadsheet-like way a list of resources that are likely to be used on projects and in a time-phased fashion. These can be built, again, across all different kinds of initiatives, or I shouldn't say initiatives, I should say project types, including opportunities, running engagements, etc. And then again, they're automatically aggregated, taking into account resource demand and availability across everything that's going on in the system. You can also model these things right alongside your Gantt chart. We will demonstrate that. And finally, you can analyze these things in terms of costs and/or revenue, providing a completely different cut for how you look at this. The question usually comes up at this point: can these things be based on other things, or do they always have to be maintained independently? And the answer is yes, they can be based. You can derive, for example, your cost model from your schedule if that makes sense in your process, but you don't have to. You can run the two things completely separately. Handoff from delivery. If you in fact are starting with a schedule that is usually built by either a TSP or delivery itself, once the deal closes, they are taking over the exact same schedule seamlessly and then adding to it. So there is no longer a disconnect where somebody has done something for sales that may or may not actually have bearing or set expectations with the client. Instead, it's a schedule that has been built and is in system and can be leveraged to start the engagement. Just the same as we don't attempt to dislodge CRM that is working or an ERP that is working. We also support other scheduling tools, and this is kind of an important part about OnePlan. Out of the box, we support Project for the Web, Project Professional, Smartsheet, Microsoft Planner, etc. So, for example, if in your organization you have a lot of people who love Smartsheet and they're not going to give it up to manage their projects, that's great. We can take those schedules and we can publish those directly to OnePlan without any problem. Finally, and we see this in a lot of organizations now as well, we want to see a combination of agile and waterfall. This is usually, again, because at the sales cycle, you've contracted for deliverables or a timeline in some sense. But within the engagement itself, you want to operate according to sprints and leverage a backlog. This is, again, super common in a lot of our clients. And the goal is to say, yes, we recognize and we're realistic about the fact that when we have clients, they expect deadlines to be kept. They expect the commitments we've made to be monitored. At the same time, they are willing to accept that maybe their requirements were a little sketchy at the beginning and they need further articulation. And by the way, this is, I'm couching this in terms of the language of software, but this exists across all kinds of industries, including things like contract engineering companies, contract biomedical and biotech companies. These all have the same kind of the same set of features. Of course, once you get down to the details, they're different, but they do all tend to go through very similar processes. And here we show kind of we have sprints running across the top. We'll talk about this in terms of the demo as well a little bit. Finally, when we talk about your team members, we're in a position where we want to make sure that everybody working on the project can see what's going on across all of their assignments, of course. Timesheets, basic functionality in OnePlan, but beyond that, we find that people want an aid to deciding what they should be working on and what's next, before their week starts, as opposed to the timesheet, which tends to be at the end of their week and they're rushing to get their time in. So we provide both the kind of look ahead and the ability to alert your resources to what you should be working on and considering, and as well as, again, when you're actually having to account for your time when filling out a timesheet. OnePlan's Sophia GPT, GPT is embedded in OnePlan, and I want to emphasize, I'm going to make some claims about how good our implementation is. I would encourage anybody that questions my claims to get a trial and do it themselves. GPT is an external Azure service for us, so it doesn't tend to demo as quickly as we'd like it to when we're in the middle of a demo. But for a person who's running a trial and has time, it's really actually has, frankly, spectacular results, including things like you can ask Sophia to leverage a project template or not to build a work breakdown structure for your project, if that makes sense. Sophia can go through and you can ask it questions like which one of these projects is at risk and likely to fail, which one of these resources are over capacity and need to be re-leveled. So it's actually a very effective natural language query tool that operates in the context of the screen you're on and provides the same kind of results based on your data that you are getting from GPT on the web to OpenAI or whatever it is that you whatever it is you choose to leverage. And again, these claims kind of sound kind of fantastical, and I recognize that. So anybody that wants to trial this should do so and prove out what I'm claiming. OnePlan integrations are at the heart of how OnePlan functions. I hope that's obvious by this point. OnePlan, the intention is to aggregate and to support executive decisions for optimizations of revenue. But we again recognize that every environment is probably heterogeneous, and any system that's in place and working usually can be integrated with OnePlan without much of an issue. We have a lot of out-of-the-box options, and all of it is productized, does not require a developer, It is user configurable in the end, so all these things should be considered kind of part of the product itself and a matter of configuration, not of things needing to go off to a custom dev team. OnePlan also has the benefit of fusing itself into various environments. And what that means is for those tools that enable OnePlan to present itself, we can ensure that your users never have to leave the product that they are used to working in. So what we have kind of on here is Jira, Azure DevOps, Dynamics, Power Apps, any environment where you have a user, a salesperson, or you have an engineer who wants to only do their work in Jira, for example, they're able to leverage OnePlan as needed for their role without having to ultimately leave that environment. And again, I think this is a very powerful feature of OnePlan and goes with our narrative and our story that we are, in fact, not in the business of dislodging what's broken, but instead aggregating it and adding to it. Salesforce, same thing. You can work through your basic sales quote. And by the way, OnePlan uses Salesforce, and this is the way we do things. So you are in a position where you can start early building your schedules and start early making your capacity decisions and do so in a lightweight fashion, but then you can carry it through to your planning and your execution. Timesheets, status reports, project status back to users, and then off to the integrated financial system as well, depending on how that works or to how that works in your organization. And I realize I'm moving through this very quickly. We're going to show some of these things, so there's no point in kind of dwelling on it. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and move over to a demonstration. First things first, OnePlan is a highly configurable environment. This is one view of the world from OnePlan, but if I go up here and I change this to the PSA demo, for example, I can see that I'm now organizing things by accounts. I can see that I'm now organizing things by accounts, projects, opportunities, epics. And this is kind of key in terms of any PSA system. You can see that we're both blending things like epics. If you are working with Agile, you can think of things in terms of projects or engagements, if that makes sense. You can think of things in terms of support or opportunities. It's all represented in one place. Contract values, of course, all roll up and roll down. And we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be proposed versus active when we talk about the modeler and pulling things in and out. But the key is that at root, OnePlan is highly configurable, and you do not need to work in terms of our plan types. You can work in terms of what makes sense in your organization. It can be simplified, it can be magnified or amplified depending on what makes sense. So I'm going to switch back over to a different demo. Some more basics, highly configurable in terms of things that you see for navigation, depending on role as well. So this is not just a one shoe fits all. Each role will have its own view of the world. Kind of the basics of having filtering, columns, group by, things like a Gantt chart showing both the project dependencies across projects and milestones within those projects at a glance. Also, the basics of systems that people are connected to. And, again, in a heterogeneous environment, you would expect to see all sorts of things like this, and you do. And what we'll show is that all these things then ultimately roll up to resourcing. So down below, if I wanted to add resource plans for your portfolio, I can see everybody's in green, but I have the demand across my entire resource pool based on what's up in this portfolio. I can also see financial plans, in this case, based on budgets. I want to come in here and I want to go to next year. And I can do things like comparisons as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit as we get a little bit further. The upshot is that all three views, so both the project schedule view and the resource capacity planning view and budgeting, including revenue forecast, can be shown side by side. But in the case of, it depends on what system it is that you ultimately want to optimize for, but you can see how each one impacts the other one, and each one can be run independently. So I'm going to drill down into a project called Work Planner. We have the ability to integrate with various systems out of the box to work with this plan. And yes, it can be done with various pieces depending on what you need. We have work type of schedule, but we also can have a work type of backlog, if that makes sense. We can show the risks and the issues that are associated with this project. And one of the important things when it comes down to when we talk about the fact that we're working against contracted deliverables as well as resource chargeability and resource utilization, each one of these risks can exist as a scheduled item as well with its own workflow and template and resource assignments depending on what makes sense in an organization. So I can convert this to a milestone as well. If I want to come in and do a quick edit on this item, I've got the ability to see down the side what the risk information is, the various custom fields that we've applied. I can see resources that happen to be on this risk. I can see predecessors, and I can make notes on it as well. Again, where this really matters is if you have a project schedule with contracted deliverables and you are both attempting to optimize for resource chargeability and for delivery, you need to know what are the risks to that and who are the people that are responsible for it. I'm going to go back to the schedule. Various details, completely configurable across all of OnePlan. This workflow is configurable depending on what it is that you're talking about. So risk can have a different workflow than a project schedule, than an opportunity can have a different workflow, that an issue can have a different workflow. And each one of these things can have a different set of metadata. The financials for the project itself can be broken down by configurable cost categories. They can be compared to, in this case, let's compare forecast to budget. They can be compared between two items so that you can see how you're running against both your budget or your schedule. Each project can have its own resource plan as well. I'm going to change this to next year. And you can see people's availability or lack thereof across all schedules in the system, as well as on this particular project. And finally, the project itself can be run through a Kanban style board, if that makes sense. These are all drag and droppable. Again, the columns across the top, completely configurable. The rows across the left, also completely configurable. The resource pool, this is a global resource pool across the system. It will show everybody or every item that people are working on, what their availability is. This is editable on a cell by cell fashion if that's what makes sense for your process. It can also be derived strictly from the schedule if that is what suits your process. But the upshot is that this is a very straightforward spreadsheet style mechanism for allocating resources across both possible work and actual work that should be familiar to a lot of organizations and resource planners, that does not require each person to drill down into a project and assign people to each task. Again, I want to pause and say, yes, that does mean that you can have a disagreement between how you've scheduled a person on a project schedule and how you've scheduled a person in your resource plan. And I say you could have a disagreement because you could force one or the other to be the primary. But the goal is to say, we understand that the project schedule often represents a list of contracted deliverables understood by sales and the project manager that may be in disagreement with the need for the resource planner to actually make sure that all of their resources are chargeable. What we, again, enable is for both plans to coexist, and then you can see the contrast between the two and make a data-driven decision about that, as opposed to simply wondering why we can never manage to optimize for resource chargeability or wondering why we can never manage to get a project done. Last item that I want to talk about, I think it's very important, is the modeler. In OnePlan, we are able to support the ability to model incoming demand without impacting the actual portfolio itself or set of your work portfolio. And we're able to do so without or leveraging at the same time, leveraging the actual data in the portfolio. So the first step is, and this gets a little bit abstract, each model is a set of assumptions and or restrictions about what it is that you're attempting to model. So you might come in, you might say, we need to model demand for the entire next year. We might need to model demand for next quarter. We might want to have a good, better, best set of scenarios within the model, where good being we close some sales, better being we close a few more sales, and best being, we close everything that's in the pipeline. So those scenarios, in this case, exist underneath the model itself. So I'm able to say, open up a scenario that I've constructed, and I can see what I can do and what I can't do. I'm able to look at the resource impact underneath. Next year, see if we have a little bit better data. I'm able to look at the resource capacity or the resource impact underneath and make adjustments as I want to. I'm able to do the same thing for the financial plan or budgets, cost, revenue. Better still, I'm able to come into the details, and I'm able to compare one scenario to the other and see what my differences are in terms of which I can do in prioritization. And this is all, again, completely configurable as far as it goes. And I'm able to do the same thing. If I come in here and I do this, I'm able to do the same thing visually. And I can, of course, come in and say, show me this in terms of a bubble chart as well. I'm able to look at this in terms of a model with a set of assumptions and scenarios underneath that I can then quickly present to maybe a decision maker or an executive, where I can look like a complete star and say, hey, this is what it looks like if we close this many deals. This is what it looks like if we close this many. This is our resource hiring that we'll need to do. And you're able to do this repeatedly because you can save it when they come in and the assumptions change. Let's say you set it out at the start of the year, and then next quarter you have to do it again and again. Because each one of these is savable, you're able to start with your work initially and then pull in the assumptions that you already have. Okay. In any case, anything that I'm showing, I would like to say, please be sure to double check me. I'm more than happy to do a demo in real time where you ask questions and we can drill down. I'm not afraid of looking like I don't know what I'm talking about. I'll always get back to you with a different answer if I don't know. But also, we are going to suggest that you have a free trial if you really have questions about OnePlan. So I would encourage both. In summary, OnePlan sits as a piece of a puzzle by design. We think that this generally helps adoption. We are in the business of making sure that you are able to forecast both contracted deliverables and resource chargeability scenarios. And we're able to support multiple different mechanisms for project planning, depending on what your organization leverages or needs to for various parts of projects. We are consistently recognized as a market leader. We've been around for a while, so if anybody has any concerns or wants to look deeper into that, please let me know. Finally, getting started today, free trials. You will see that there are various templates you can select from. There is no limit on these. You can start another trial anytime. Nobody's gonna say, oh, you've started 3 trials, that's a problem. You can also modify the template once you've already started a trial. We do have instructions for that published online. I can send those along if anybody's interested. I can suggest that you start with a professional service automation trial, but you can pick any one just to see what various differences are. OnePlan, again, a very highly configurable tool, and all these templates are just a matter of configurations that you could do by hand as well if you wanted to. So they should be thought of as starting points, not as an end point, and certainly don't require developers' involvement. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for the last half an hour of your time. I hope if you have any questions at all or want to dig deeper into any of these topics, you feel free to contact us, and I appreciate your day.